All right, Anna, so thanks very much for joining me. I really appreciate your time, and it's nice to finally meet you.
Yeah, thank you for bearing with me, Ellen. It's great to be here with you.
Oh, good. Look, I thought when I was thinking about talking to you, I kind of broke it into two things. There's the amazing career you've had, which, by anybody's standard is almost like the dream journalism career. And then it's also broken into the next bit, which is the new direction in which you're heading with independent media and stuff like that. So for those that don't know you, you've worked at pretty much all of the important mastheads around the world, not only the Financial Times, but the Washington Post and a bunch of stuff in
Yeah.
between. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about how you got there and what that's been like?
Yeah, great. Yes, I feel like I've been incredibly fortunate to have the career I've had, and hopefully it's still continuing. But yeah, I grew up in Hastings, always dreaming of being a foreign correspondent. As a teenager, watching Cameron Bennett and Liam Giori racing around in the Balkans. Older listeners will will remember them.
God, I used to work with
Um,
them.
Oh, there you go. And I always wanted to do that. I thought that sounded like the dream, getting to travel the world and go to far-flung places and ask questions, talk to real people there. So I went to journalism school in Canterbury, worked in New Zealand for a few years, started at the Whakatane branch office of the Rotorua Daily Post.
Nice.
And then I won a fellowship for 3 months to go to the UK, and a very kind journalist who I'd met only once or twice, Rod Oram, made an introduction for me to spend 3 months doing work experience at the Financial Times. And I stayed there, in
Wow.
fact, for 13 years, during which time I was economics correspondent. I was posted to Korea. I lived in Seoul for 4 years, then to Tehran, then Beirut, and then finally I was the White House correspondent for the FT during the Obama years. So that was incredible.
Yeah.
Then I went off to Harvard for a year as a journalism fellow and joined the Washington Post after that, where I was Tokyo bureau chief, then Beijing bureau chief, and most recently Asia editor. So yes, it's been a dream run, and I feel really lucky to have been out there in the world. But now increasingly also lucky to be home and focusing back on New Zealand.
Sure. I mean, the Financial Times and the Washington Post are, if you leave out the New York Times, it's kind of like the top three kind of things going on. And I've long had a bit of a fascination with the Washington Post. Read Catherine Graham's book, autobiography,
Yeah.
which is an amazing read. It's an incredible book.
Yeah.
Just, I mean, I know you worked there physically for a while, and then you also worked back in New Zealand for them. What was it like working at an institution like that?
Yeah, I mean, both the FT and the Washington Post were incredible places to work, full of really top-notch journalists who are trying, every day to hold power to account. That's the guiding principle. The Washington Post, of course, was famous for and under Kay Graham's tenure as well, for standing up to Nixon and exposing Watergate and leading to the impeachment of Richard Nixon as president. So a real history of swashbuckling journalism, fearless, standing
Yeah.
up to power, and that continues until this day, until recently, shall I say.
Yeah.
So it was incredible to be there, to have the resources of the Washington Post and the ambition, and all the time just working with incredible people across the photographic department, video, graphics, forensic journalism departments, just thinking, how do we add to the public's knowledge of this? How do we push boundaries? How do we reach new audiences in new ways? So it was thrilling to be part of that team and to be just constantly trying every day to do better.
Yeah. I am. I could nerd out on that for a while, but maybe we shouldn't. But when I was speaking to Charlotte Glennie a few weeks ago, and she spent a bit of time in Asia, and you obviously spent a bit of time in Asia as well. And she talks in her book, she mentions quite a bit about North Korea. And now, not a lot of people get to go to North Korea. You've kind of written the book on the guy that runs the place. What would New Zealanders not know about North Korea? How weird is it?
Yeah, funny. So I went to North Korea 12 times during the course of my periods covering North Korea. And in fact, I ran into Charlotte in the hotel lobby in Pyongyang one time. So that was a very surreal experience. Two Kiwi journalists in Pyongyang. I think the thing that many people think about North Korea, I mean, first of all, the leader, Kim Jong-un, who I wrote a book about,
Yep.
he is often viewed as this cartoon character villain. I mean, he doesn't help himself because he looks like one with his weird haircut and the crazy things he does, like lying on a tank while his 13-year-old daughter drives it. But he is a very, very shrewd, strategic leader of North Korea. He had a very difficult task trying to keep this decrepit regime together, and he's done it. He's now been there for 15 years. But I think there is this widespread perception that the 25 million people of North Korea are brainwashed robots, and they are not at all. I mean, they are fed a constant diet of propaganda, starting from kindergarten, where they are forced to sing these songs about the imperialist American aggressors and things like that. But increasingly, they are able to access information from the outside world despite the regime's best efforts. So, most North Koreans have now seen South Korean dramas, listen to K-pop, listen to watch Chinese action films that are smuggled into the country. And they know that the whole system is a lie, that Kim Jong-un is not some quasi-deity sent down from the mountains to look after them. But so they know all of this, but there is still to this day just no dissent, no opposition, no way for anybody to criticize Kim Jong-un or the regime without putting their lives at risk. So I think that's the message, that these are ordinary people trying to do their best under a terrible system.
Yeah. I guess that could kind of lead into, why the kind of journalism that you've been doing over the years is important, and why it was seen by larger institutions as important, yet we kind of find ourselves in this weird spot right now where it's kind of almost being jettisoned from a lot of places. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, the reporting that I really loved to do, I call like dust on boots reporting, where I wanted, I didn't love being in Washington because there wasn't enough dust. I didn't wear boots. But I loved, in China, in Iran, in North Korea as much as I could, or with North Korea, usually outside North Korea, but talking to ordinary people and finding, writing stories about our common humanity and our shared interests and goals and things like that, and just trying to show readers that the people of North Korea were not brainwashed, that these kind of regimes where people authoritarians are in power are not ruling countries with people with horns growing out of their heads or things like that, just to show the humanity there and look at societal changes, how things are happening, because a lot of big changes are taking place. When I was in Iran, there were, and probably to this day actually, many more women going to university than men, so much so that the Iranian universities were talking about having quotas for men to make sure that they were not underrepresented. So these kind of things, challenge our preconceptions about these countries. So that was the kind of reporting I love to do and that I think is really important. As you mentioned, newspapers have been backing away from this to some extent. The Washington Post, the reason I lost my job in February, as did 374 or so other journalists, was because they closed almost the entire foreign desk of the Washington Post to refocus on Washington itself, which is nonsensical because, national security needs a good foreign network to be able to report those NatSec stories. So we've seen a big retrenchment there. But the other big factor with regards to China in particular is that the Chinese Communist Party has weaponized journalist visas, and the number of foreign correspondents operating inside of China has just plummeted in the last few years. And many are now based outside the country, which means that a lot of the reporting on China is done through satellite imagery. It's about China's militarization, which of course is a really important story, but it's not the whole story. We don't get many stories. Exactly. We don't get the texture of life in China, this incredible country, anymore.
Yeah, so when I was talking to Charlotte about China, it was kind of like there was, if you think back to the Olympics, there was a whole bunch of optimism, that it was opening up, and that we were seeing more of China in the world. And when I say seeing more of China in the world, more of actual China, not Chinese power in the world. And it feels kind of sad that we've kind of ended up where we are.
Yeah, I think you're right. And those 7 years between China joining the WTO in 2001 and the Olympics in 2008, China was kind of flourishing and opening up. But I think two things happened in 2008, which were not the Olympics. One was the global financial crisis,
Right.
which made China think, hey, maybe that Western capitalist
Yeah, not
model
so good.
isn't all it's cracked up to be. But also, that was the year that Xi Jinping became vice president of China and really started to assume much more responsibility. And once he became the full leader of China in 2013, we saw this very sharp move to more authoritarian type tendencies, like crackdown on civil society, freedom of speech, and the regression to the kind of system we see today, which, China is no longer really even a one-party state. It's a one-person state
Yeah,
under
yeah,
Xi
yeah, yeah.
Jinping. He's got such a tight grip on the place.
One of the things you mentioned before when you were talking about the universities in Iran, Tehran, I was thinking about with the current issues that we're going through, it's kind of like one of the things that has been completely left out of the story, except for maybe the first couple of days of the US bombing, is the people of Iran. It just and you're talking about dust on your boots. It's like there's a limited number of people there, and you just there's no overall sense of what's happening, and it feels very it feels weird.
Yeah. Yeah, it does feel weird. And that's because there are really no foreign correspondents left in Iran. And they've allowed a couple of
Yeah, I've seen that.
journalists into the country, but on short term visas, very sporadic. But also, the fact is that Iran has this, firewall. They've turned off the internet for all intents and purposes for long periods of time. So it's been really difficult for Iranian people to take to social media to share videos or accounts of what's been happening there and what life on the ground has been like. So yes, it's a very weird situation where we get so little information about what's happening inside Iran and the impact that this, Trump's war of choice has had on the lives of these people who live there.
I actually feel, and you tell me if you think I'm nuts, but I actually feel it's more than that. That there's a lack of willingness or care from the institutions. Well, let's say I'm going to call out the Washington Post or whoever. It's kind of like that doesn't matter to them anymore. It's almost like it's we're doing Beltway stuff and that's it, and that's all we care about now.
I mean, that's definitely the case with the Washington Post. They've really refocused on Washington. But I think, the New York Times has been doing incredible reporting, and they have several really great Iranian American journalists, one of whom was fired by the Washington Post in February and immediately went to the Times,
Yeah.
who, she's based in Istanbul. Another one, a good friend of mine, is based in New York, and they are calling people inside Iran and have really good contacts both in the regime and in society. So they're able to do a lot of groundbreaking reporting and tell us what's going on inside Iran. But, this is the New York Times, which has incredible resources,
Yeah.
thanks largely to Wordle and connections, the
Yes.
fact that they're a games company now
Yeah.
with some news tacked on. So they're a special case, but generally, there hasn't been a big capacity in other media outlets to report on what's happening inside Iran in the same way that the Times has been able to do.
So it's interesting that you bring up the Times, being a gaming company and stuff like that. And I remember, I can't remember how many years ago now, it would be like 10, 15 years ago, the famous leaked digitization report from the New York Times, what they were going to do to get ahead of things. And they had that was David Carr was their sort of
Media
media
editor,
guy, and
yeah,
it was
yeah.
amazing. And I remember all that, and it felt like they had a view about how they were going to step into the future, and it might have been a bit haphazard and accidental, but it turns out it's actually worked, and I feel it can work for others, but they've actively chosen not to. And I guess once again, I'm talking about the Washington Post here. It's like they've there is a way that institution is profitable and can still do the good work it was doing, and it feels like they just weren't interested.
I don't know if that's the case. I think with the New York Times, yes, they had a really clear plan, and it's worked. So the games, yeah, make them an enormous amount of money. They also have the cooking app, which is
Yeah,
very popular, and this branded kind of product review service called
yeah,
Wirecutter. I think they were just first, and they did it really, really well. So the Washington Post did try to have games, but they were a bit lame, and they didn't
yeah,
take off in the same way that that the Times did. But also the Guardian developed a cooking vertical, which also, was paid separately, but has just not been as
big,
successful from the outside as the New York Times has. So I think the New York Times just got there first, invested a lot in it. Also, if we look at podcasts, the way they've got the daily, their video
yeah,
podcasts, they have been ahead of the game. But even, with the changes at the Washington Post and the way that under Jeff Bezos, since Trump came back in, he's really tried to curtail so many parts of
yeah,
the Post. So in February, in this kind of bloodbath that happened, the whole book section was closed down,
mm,
the entire sports section, almost the entire foreign desk. They chopped the daily news podcast. So they really retrenched from
yeah,
that, and in a way that was a really deliberate
yeah.
deliberate tactic there. So, I mean, there are decisions being made on both sides.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because as long as there's been media, there have been very rich people that have owned media. I mean, it's just the way it's always been. Your Murdochs, your Maxwells, go further back, but it's kind of like the institutions somehow have managed to muddle through and stay separate, but it just feels like we're in a slightly different time in that sense. It feels like, yeah, I don't know why it's different, but it definitely feels different.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really alarming that we now have all these billionaires buying American media outlets. And I joined the Washington Post in 2014. That was a year after Jeff Bezos had bought it. And for those first,
Yeah,
I
really
guess, like
optimistic.
12 years, it was amazing. He was,
Yeah,
pumping a lot of money into it, and especially on the engineering side to make everything just work
yeah,
faster, investing in the staff. The journalist numbers doubled. So it felt incredible until that moment, when Trump was poised to return and Jeff Bezos decided to basically suck up to Trump,
yeah,
to change cancel the endorsement of Kamala Harris, to change the editorial
yeah.
line of the newspaper, and just preside over this, really big and alarming changes that led to an exodus of star reporters, but also of subscribers. But since then, we've seen the Allisons buying
Paramount,
Paramount, taking over CBS, soon about
TikTok.
to take over CNN.
Yeah,
So there's they're no longer benign owners of these media outlets. They are ones with political motivations who are appointing their,
that sense of
political.
custodianship seems to have gone, doesn't it? It used to almost feel
Yeah.
like, a really rich, equivalent of a billionaire would buy an institution because it propped them up in some way, and it kind
Yeah, it
of
gave them mana. It was a,
yeah,
a vanity project in
yes,
many
that's right.
cases, but now they are political projects to further their
And these guys are
aims.
absolutely
And
political animals. Yeah,
exactly,
yeah,
exactly. And, in New Zealand, we don't exactly have the same situation, but, we did see an attempt
yeah,
by a Canadian billionaire to take over the New Zealand Herald.
yeah,
And, but so we are in a different situation, but I've also seen things that make me concerned here in the way that the government, Christopher Luxon and also David Seymour, have made comments about the media here, particularly TVNZ and
and
Radio New
RNZ.
Zealand.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly, in ways that just smack of political interference to me and put me on alert to think we have
yeah,
to really safeguard our editorial independence here in New Zealand, because we can't take it for granted.
yeah. So, just before we get into the kind of new media bit, what do you think that audiences don't know? What they don't know, what they don't know. But what don't they know they're going to be missing from foreign correspondents traveling the world on the ground?
Yeah. I think, it's really easy, especially when Donald Trump is talking about, the evil Iranian regime and things like that, to demonize people or to other them. But the point of foreign correspondence is to be able to show what's really happening on the ground and what the people are like, and what the people think about these things. So, and our understanding of China's rise, of Iran's nuclear motivations, a lot of the reporting there has lower understanding has come from reporting, but
Yeah,
also a lot of the things that these regimes in particular are doing that are alarming have been exposed by foreign correspondents. And in the case of China, we look at these enormous detention camps that were built by the Communist Party in Xinjiang to house literally millions of Uyghur
yeah,
Muslim people, and kind of it was a cultural genocide that happened there in the Xinjiang region, where they were trying to strip them of their language, of their religion, of their freedom of speech. And all of this was exposed by foreign correspondents who were there on the ground and in Xinjiang, but also using satellite imagery to show what was happening in a way that Chinese reporters no longer could because of the constraints put
yeah,
on them by the Chinese system. So a lot of human rights abuses and holding foreign powers to account also increasingly comes from journalists. So I think we really need to know that. And in New Zealand, we can't just look at China as, this enormous consumer market buying all of our milk powder and our
yeah,
logs. We
yeah.
need to understand much more what China's goals are in terms of its maritime expansion, its diplomatic influence in the world. So we need to look at the whole picture, in other words.
Yeah. So one of the things we talk about on the podcast and in the newsletter is sort of mid-career pivots or starting a business or, using technology to make some kind of living or whatever. And clearly, so you hit some kind of point where, you're made redundant, you're looking around, working out what to do. Most people would have gone and found another job. That's kind of, what happens. So how did
Yeah.
you get to where you are now with your Substack, Between Giants, and what was the process in going, that's what I'm going to try?
Yeah, great question. It was a bit of a roller coaster. I was made redundant in February and I turned 50 in March. So it felt like all of a sudden
Convenient.
the universe was telling me something.
Yeah,
It felt like a real crunch point. And I did, I did take a beat at that time and really think about what I wanted to do with this next chapter in my life. I did look at other jobs and I did consider leaving journalism and thought maybe it's time to try something new. But as I looked around and thought about what that might look like, but also thought about, all of the experience I had gained over the decades
yeah,
out in the world, and just the complete lack, or not complete lack, sorry, that's a bit harsh, but the relative lack of foreign affairs reporting in New Zealand.
yeah,
We have Sam Such-Deva at Newsroom and uh, at the Post, Annika Smith doing really good reporting, but that's a fraction of their jobs.
yeah,
And I just thought, I'm not ready to leave journalism. I really love this. I would like to bring my experience to bear and contribute to New Zealand's understanding of the world in some way, if that doesn't sound too highfalutin. But also at this extraordinary geopolitical moment where we had Donald Trump in the White House, launching this raid in Venezuela against Maduro, conducting this war of choice against Iran, talking about Greenland, talking about Cuba, all these things. I thought, it's a puzzling time, and maybe I could do a public service in a way by writing about some of these issues, and especially about China, which is obviously our main
yeah,
preoccupation, with it being our biggest trading partner. So yeah, I decided that the vehicle for that would be to launch a Substack newsletter, spurred on by Bernard Hickey, the
oh,
OG
yeah,
of New Zealand Substackery. And I've been really blown away and gratified by the response. I It's now, I'm in my third month and I've got 3,500 subscribers, which
Yeah,
is
that's
obviously
exceptional.
much less than a newspaper, but it feels like a lot in Substack land. And so I've been really thrilled by this and pouring a lot of energies into that. But I've also been, writing a column for The Listener, doing the World Bulletin for the spin-off, and just going on TV and radio as much as they want, because I really, now I'm trying to help foster this discussion in New Zealand about our place in the world. So it's a bit terrifying,
Yep.
fending for myself, but I'm having a blast.
Actually, you mentioned something kind of interesting there, and you kind of blew past it, but it was your 3,000 subscribers, which is much less than a newspaper, but not everybody's reading your article in the newspaper.
Yeah, I mean, we can't measure that. I mean, I guess we can measure that in terms of the metrics that you see when you're inside a newspaper and how many clicks you get. But I do think that it shows that there's a hunger in New Zealand
Yeah,
for this kind of reporting. That's the message I'm taking. And there is no paywall, but almost 10% of people have chosen to pay. I do offer the
yeah,
option of paying, because I am trying to make ends meet. So I'm really, that means a lot to me, that people don't have to pay, but they choose to because they value what I'm
yeah.
doing. So, yeah, I'm really encouraged by this, and obviously hope the numbers continue to rise.
What what other than the audience acceptance in this process has surprised you?
I mean, people have been stopping me on the street to say that they are enjoying the newsletter, so that's obviously great. But
Yeah,
I think, with this new momentum I have, I've been looking for ways to report. Charlotte did an incredible job as the Asia correspondent for TVNZ and was reporting for a New Zealand audience from all these places. And I'm trying to do a little bit of that now, and that I went to Singapore in a few weeks ago,
sweet.
to the Shangri-La Defence Dialogue, where I was a little bit mischievous and I asked Pete Hegseth a question in front of Chris Pink, our Defence Minister, throwing back Hegseth's words to him about countries that don't spend 3.5% of their GDP
Yeah,
on defence are freeloaders. And that made, he said that countries that don't are freeloaders.
yep,
That made a lot of waves here in New Zealand in a way that I thought was, actually really good, because there was a lot of discussion at that
yep,
time, on TV, in the newspapers, on the radio, about what kind of role we should be playing in this changing world, and whether it does make sense to be spending billions of dollars on frigates in a world where military conflict is increasingly asymmetric, and where much, much cheaper drones are arguably a more powerful deterrent than frigates themselves. So that's been great, and I think it's exactly the kind of thing I want to be doing.
yeah. That definitely made some waves. Wh- Um, One of the things I often think about journalists is, so I consider myself a generalist, and like my handle online is generalist
Yeah.
Alan, and I sometimes beat myself up because I wasn't a lawyer or an accountant, was never a specialist at something. But when I think about it, journalists are the ultimate generalists in that they go into a space they know nothing about, do some work, come out and explain it to people in a way that they understand it. That's kind of like the superpower of a journalist. Do you think that has been helpful in going about, because you're setting up a little mini business now,
Yeah,
essentially?
I am.
Yeah. Has that been helpful in that sense?
Well, I mean, yes, and I take your point about journalists as generalists, but in each of these places, I did move to Korea at age 26 or something,
Yes,
not
I wasn't
having
being
ever.
dismissive of your expertise.
Yeah, yeah, no, but not having eaten kimchi, not being able to say
Yeah,
hello. And I really threw myself into it and put in a lot of effort to learning Korean, and obviously
yeah,
reading a lot of books and upskilling. So, yeah, so I would say that and I'm not, don't really call myself an expert on anything, because I'm not an academic. I don't have a PhD, and I'm
yeah,
constantly reminded of what I don't know, and that it's a lifelong process. But I have spent a lot of time in these countries in Asia. I have spoken to a lot of people, and tried to embed myself, and hopefully developed some knowledge over the course of those years on the ground. So, I would hope that I would occupy a space between generalist and expert, where I'm, an informed lifelong learner, trying to pull together things. But yeah, like, to your point, I didn't know anything about critical minerals or rare earths 18 months ago, but as this became a really big, or maybe a few years ago, as this has become a really big geopolitical issue, as China has weaponized its supply of rare earths and critical minerals to the world, I've suddenly learned a lot about gallium and germanium and all
Yeah,
these other things. So, yeah, so it is a constant process of having to jump on the news and learn about things at that time and just talk to a lot of people. And I mean, that's what makes it so fun, right? You're
sure.
constantly learning.
What about, because I actually meant, what about from the setting up of a Substack to having to try and reach out to people, so just the change in your works, in your work sense, I guess. So you're no longer working under, and you're doing this yourself. You've had to
Yeah.
learn a whole bunch of things, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Did I just go into
That's all
defensive
right.
posture then?
But it's still
You
interesting.
must have had a nerve. um, yeah. So it's thrilling to be on my own Substack, being my own boss. I don't report to anybody. I don't manage anybody anymore. I'm master of my own day in many ways, but that does mean I'm working twice as hard as I was before. So it's really great that I get to decide what I write about. I'm directly responsive to readers and have a communication with my readers in a way that I wouldn't have had at a traditional news
Yeah,
organization. But also, yeah, it's quite terrifying because trying to freelance and make my own way in this world is not easy, especially in this economic environment.
yeah.
But I just thought to myself, this is a moment in my life and in the world, and I'm going to give myself a year and see if I can make it work. So that's what I'm trying to do, to see if I can make a living for myself, and beyond that, also feel like I'm doing meaningful
Yeah.
work that
Yeah.
contributes. And so, yeah, so I'll give it a year. But so far, so good. It's
So
month
good, yeah.
3, and
Um,
yeah, it's
I
going
have
well.
this hypothesis that I'm going to throw at you, and you can tell me I'm an idiot. And Paula Penfold, I've banged on to her about this
I
over and
love
over
Paula
again.
Penfold and her work.
So there's been this weird change over the let's say last 10 years, just as an example, where inverted commas mainstream media's trust has you know plummeted for whatever reason, people deliberately undermining it, or people, bad actors or whatever. But to the point where the mainstream media is so mistrusted now. In the past, when you were a journalist, a lot of your credibility came from the masthead or the organization you were working for. So you go to, I don't know, Taiwan and say, "Hey, I'm with the New York Times," and they go, "Right, you're a serious person. We're going to talk to you." Yada yada yada. With the demise of that trust, and the rise of independent media, a lot of individual journalists have set themselves up, and they have become the trusted masthead in a way. So people have chosen who they're going to get their information from, and they trust those people, which is great if they're trustworthy people and are doing the good work. But to the point where now mainstream media is going to end up turning around because the trust is so bad, they're going to start re-employing where the trust is and bringing them back. It's kind of like the trust tree has changed. So the journalist has the trust now, not the masthead. And the mastheads are going to need to kind of rely on that more and more, is my sense. Is that nonsense? What do you think?
Potentially nonsense. I'm not sure. I totally agree with you about trust, and we've seen all the surveys, not just in New Zealand but around the world,
Yeah,
showing how trust in journalism has been undermined. A lot of this is due to editorial decisions made by newspapers, but also
yeah,
from concerted disinformation campaigns and the kind of
yeah,
polarization of media. And we've now got all these silos, and as Donald Trump would put it, alternative facts.
yeah,
So that's, yeah, hugely damaging. Now fueled by the rise of AI and deep fakes and
yeah,
all of these, videos and things that it's impossible to even the trained eye in many cases to tell what's true and what's not. So this has led to this, huge erosion in trust across the board. I actually think that mastheads do have a role to play, and that we know that well-resourced or trusted media do have fact-checking processes, verification processes, sub-editors still,
Yep.
and that they are at least trying to get balance into their stories and seek comment from all sides, and doing what we'd think of as traditional journalism as opposed to kind of citizen journalism or what
Yep.
have you. I think, the Substack life is not for everybody. I think I can do it because I have had this experience in the world, and
Sure.
without tooting my own horn too much, I think I do have something of, a reputation
Yep.
for having done serious work. So, as do many other people like Anne Applebaum or Bernard Hickey or people who are on Substack operating
Yep.
under their own names there. To the question of whether the question I thought was maybe nonsense was the idea about journalists returning to the mainstream media.
Yeah, so I
And
wasn't suggesting they return. I was suggesting
uh
that mainstream media uses their credibility. So like with what you did in
mm,
Singapore, TVNZ used you in Singapore, for example.
yeah. Well, not with full credit, I might add, either.
Sorry, not even as a bad choice.
But yeah, I mean, maybe it's that independent journalists are making news, and so, but that in a way is not that new, and that doesn't happen so much in New Zealand, which I think is pretty bad. But
Right.
for example, at the Washington Post, if the New York Times or Politico or Axios had broken a story, and also vice versa, there is a good practice there of crediting the.
Attribution.
Yeah, exactly. So you'll often see, this was first reported by Politico or what have
Yeah.
you. So that kind of attribution is happening already, and I think that will continue as journalists on Substack break news, and should continue. Credit where credit's due. But so I don't. But like in my situation, I am like. Never say never, but I'm really happy doing what I'm doing and being independent and deciding each day what I write, and having that direct connection to readers. So I would not want to go back to a traditional media job at this stage.
Yeah. But might not have made my point brilliantly, which is not unusual for me. But but I one of the things I've noticed, because I'm a big consumer of independent news as well as mainstream stuff. I look at in the space political, particularly in the political
Mhm.
space out of the United States. I look at like the Bulwark or Crooked Media, those guys who have got so big, but they're still talking to only their people. And maybe that's a flaw in independent media is because people are choosing their own messengers, they're not hearing the whole message. Thoughts on that?
I mean, yes, I take your point. And if you look at something like Pod Save America, that great political podcast that was
Yep.
set up by
Crooked Media guys, yeah.
former Obama administration people, really entertaining podcast. But yes, it's clearly of the left of the
Yep.
Democratic Party offering that point of view. So I don't, I'm not sure that they are catering to that audience, but they are, have a certain view, come from a certain place. So that audience automatically goes to them, is
Yep.
attracted to them. But I do think we are seeing, yes, like you say, Bulwark and these people coming from specific places on the political spectrum that are appealing to those people on the political spectrum. There's nothing to stop a MAGA Republican listening to the podcast or vice versa. It's
Yeah,
just
but
they
I guess
don't want to, right?
they're not gonna
Yeah.
choose. So it's like you mentioned Anne
Yeah.
Applebaum before, who's obviously just amazing. I mean, there's
Mm.
Heather, I can't remember her name now, but some
Heather
amazing people out there.
Richardson Cox
Yes.
Richardson. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
incredible putting out amazing content,
She's
huge
not a journalist,
quantity.
though. She's a professor.
Yeah, she's a
Yeah.
historian, isn't she? But it's
Yeah.
kinda like, it's all out there, but it's it's always the same people consuming it. It never gets the opportunity to break through. Well, not never. I feel it's harder for it to break through into the wider sphere.
Right, because a traditional masthead is, or a traditional, news outlet on TV or radio or whatever is committed to being objective and to being fair,
Yeah.
right? And to including all views across the spectrum. And so I would say, like the New York Times thinks absolutely that it is doing that, but it's
Yeah.
thought of as being very left wing.
Yeah.
CNN would say it's the same thing, thought of as left wing. Fox News would say
Yeah.
probably that it's doing the same thing, but clearly they're not anymore. So yeah, we do see that the silos forming in America where people will watch only Fox and not CNN and
Yeah.
vice versa. So, I mean, we in New Zealand are obviously very small and have relatively few media outlets, but I think that's what makes it increasingly important that they really are objective and fair and are places where all New Zealanders can go and see their views represented on the opinion pages, but also be able to trust the news is nonpartisan, is fair, and is balanced.
Before we wrap it up, why don't we just touch on your Substack, Between
I'd be
Giants? Why don't
delighted.
you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why don't you just give us the 101 on it?
Yeah, so the Substack, it's called Between Giants. You can guess who the giants are. I mean, the US and China, of course. And so I've started doing this as a place where I do a few things each week. I have been writing like a weekly recommendations list and pulling together a few interesting things I've read or listened to. But the main piece each week is I'm trying to do a in-depth piece of journalism for the audience, which might be an explainer type thing.
Yeah.
I did do an explainer on critical minerals because that's a live issue here in New Zealand, or do original reporting as I did in Singapore from the Shangri-La Dialogue, or pieces of analysis of the news, things that are happening overseas and why they're important for New Zealand. But I've also been doing video interviews there as well, and relying on my Rolodex of contacts that I've amassed over the years to call people
Yep.
in the United States or in Europe to get their views on what is happening, big picture views, but then always asking them, what should New Zealand be doing? What are the considerations for New Zealand, for example? So I talked to a former US trade representative not so long ago about tariffs and that big picture protectionist situation that's developing, but then also asked her specifically about New Zealand. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to do foreign affairs, and geopolitics generally, but with a New Zealand lens,
Yep.
since we no longer have really that. We don't have any foreign correspondents from New Zealand out there in the world. We do for TVNZ, but not in print. So that's
Yep.
what I'm trying to do, and constantly kind of innovating and learning as I go, but really having a great time.
Well, I think it's a really great product. I've really enjoyed reading your stuff and listening to the video
Thank you.
clips and whatnot. So long may it continue. I really appreciate your
Thank you.
time. Thanks so much. It's been really interesting.
You're welcome, Alan. Thank you so much for having me on.